Good afternoon, everybody. This is Jeff J. Brown, China Rising Radio Sinoland. And if you are a YouTube, SoundCloud, iTunes, iVooc, Stitcher, all the other syndicated audio-visual platforms, if you are in the habit of going to my website, this is a little bit different today, and hopefully it'll work out, and I'll do this a couple of times a month. But on the China Rising Radio Sinoland page for this article podcast, there will be no written article. There will be a link to Covert Action Magazine, who has invited me to start writing for them a couple of times a month. So let's see how it goes. I'm very proud of this particular piece. I have been working on it for over at least 12 hours since yesterday, and I think it really explains a lot about the world's headlines today. So if you appreciate my truth-telling for the 99%, the global 99%, and telling the real story of the Chinese people, on China Rising Radio Sinoland, YouTube, and SoundCloud are links for Patreon, fundraiser, and PayPal. $1, $2, $3, $4, $5, whatever you can show for appreciating my work, I would really appreciate it. And everybody, even when people donate $1 to me, they get a personal email from me every time. Thank you. This one is called The Imperial West's Ignorance of Chinese History, Ancient and Modern, is Risking Starting World War III, for Covert Action Magazine. Pictured above, Emperor Tang ruled during China's Shang Dynasty around 1600 BC. He, Karl Marx, and communism go back, way back. Here we go. The Chinese people invite you to start in 3000 BC. In any case, in order to understand today's headlines about Sino-US relations, we have to at least go back to 1839, when the British began raping and plundering China while continuing to force onto the Chinese people illegal drugs such as opium, and then later, when invented, morphine and heroin. Victoria of England is history's biggest drug dealer, with 25% of Britain's GDP dependent on destroying 400 million Chinese people and their livelihoods. She is the, quote, drug queen pin, end of quote, of them all, making guys like El Chapo and Frank Lucas look like street corner dime bag hustlers. In the process, she forced the weak Qing emperor to sign the outrageous Treaty of Nanjing, forfeiting Hong Kong Island to turn it into the drug and money laundering capital of the world. From that point on, especially the United States, France, as well as Russia and many other European countries, and later Japan, the Sino gangbang was full steam ahead. 1/4 of humanity, which for 5,000 years was centuries ahead of every Western and Eastern civilization in terms of agriculture, industry, infrastructure, weapons, exploration, science, technology, and innovation, was relegated to being dubbed the sick man of Asia. Then the byline for the next picture. Major powers plan to cut up China for themselves. U.S., Germany, Italy, UK, France, Russia, Austria are represented by Wilhelm II, Umberto I, John Bull, Franz Joseph I, Uncle Sam, Nicholas II, and Émile Loubet. This is from the Puck magazine from August 23, 1899, by J.S. Pugh. And my addition to that is, Westerners are blind to this 110-year episode in China's modern history. 1.4 billion Chinese will never forget. Continuing on with the article, during China's Civil War, 1927 to 1950, the 1921 founded Communist Party of China, or CPC, and other anti-imperialist supporters began calling the West and Japan's pillage of the country their, quote, century of humiliation. On 1 October 1949, Mao Zedong stood overlooking citizen-filled Tiananmen Square, proclaiming the founding of the People's Republic of China, and by inference their victory over this 110-year period of exception to China's glorious millennial civilization. Thereafter, within 2 years, the CPC had rid the country of drugs, prostitution, gambling, organized crime, and the Western theft and exploitation of China's human and natural resources. And there's a picture of that day, Mao Zedong atop Tiananmen Square on 1 October 1949, announcing to his nation's 500 million citizens that their century of humiliation was finally over. Back to the article. 1917's Russian Revolution was already bad enough for global capitalism. However, 1/4 of the human race declaring their faith in communism reverberated across post-war Western empire like a red tsunami. It was the driving force behind Truman's paranoid, quote, domino theory, end of quote. Joseph McCarthy's foaming at the mouth, "Who lost China?" hysteria, and the United States' genocidal defeats in Korea and Southeast Asia, with many millions of Asians slaughtered to show for these criminal ignominies. The rest of the world may have forgotten the century of humiliation, the Western genocides in Korea and Southeast Asia, but today's 1.4 billion Chinese have not, nor will they ever. Having lived and worked with the Chinese for 16 years, I know well to say that half of them love Deng Xiaoping's reforms and opening up, in parentheses, the urban population, much less so in the rural sector, end of parentheses. Be that as it may, 95% of the Chinese people fully support Mao Zedong's anti-imperial, anti-global capitalist geopolitical outlook. Mao Zedong and Chinese leaders at all levels consider China's re-rise to have started in 1839, not with communist liberation in 1949, nor Deng's post-1978 market-oriented policies. Here is a story that very few non-Chinese know about. On 29 November 2012, China's current president, Xi Jinping, was joined by members of the Politburo Standing Committee, comprising the 7 most senior and powerful national leaders. Together they went to the National Museum on Beijing's Tiananmen Square, not to see the many magnificent thousands-year-old exhibits of Chinese civilization, but to make a very public and symbolic pronouncement to all their citizens. What they did that day was a clarion call of mass national mobilization, and for Imperial Land, it was a direct challenge to its ongoing 500-year colonial suzerainty over much of planet Earth's peoples and their natural resources. Western neocons considered it a declaration of war. The National Museum has an exhibit called, quote, Road of Rejuvenation, end of quote, which I have visited many times. The key word is rejuvenation, whose synonyms include renaissance, resurrection, revival, and resurgence. Notice they all start with re, R-E, which means again. For the Chinese people, they will again reach the pinnacle of civilizational success, not the first time. Tellingly, Road of Rejuvenation's story about China's modern resurgence starts in, you guessed it, 1839. To enter the exhibit, you have to walk across a glass-enclosed case in the floor. Inside this case is a world map. On that map shows the state of affairs across the globe in 1839, with arrows pointing out all the places where Western colonialists were raping and pillaging humanity, which at that time was most of it. Thus, President Xi and China's top leaders symbolically walked on Western imperialism and colonialism. For me, the exhibits are too diplomatic and kind to the perpetrators, but they clearly show the Chinese people's 110-year long march to freedom and liberation from Western and Japanese extermination, plunder, and tyranny. After 1949, it continues to portray China's unstoppable renaissance and the, quote, in parentheses, re-rise through the Mao, Deng, Jiang, Hu, and now Xi eras. 12 November 2012 was also when President Xi began to flesh out the concept of the, quote, Chinese dream, which was a clear riposte to the internationally coined American version. That day, while symbolically grinding his heels into the century of humiliation, he stated, and if you read it, my clarifications are in brackets, which I will pronounce out. He stated, President Xi, everyone, and I quote, everyone has an ideal in pursuit. All have their own dreams. Now everyone is talking about the Chinese dream. In my view, to realize the great rejuvenation of the Chinese nation is the greatest dream the Chinese nation has had since modern times, in brackets, meaning, of course, since 1839. This dream embodies the long-cherished wish of several generations of Chinese people, embodies the overall interests of the Chinese nation and people, and represents the common aspiration of all Chinese people. She continued, history tells us that the future and destiny of every individual are closely linked to the future and destiny of a country and a nation. A good country, a good nation, enables everyone to be good people. The great rejuvenation of the Chinese nation is a glorious and arduous undertaking that requires the joint efforts and generations of Chinese people. End of Xi's statement on 12 November. What was it? I forgot 12 November 2012. All right, back to the article. These are not, quote, new, end of quote, ideas. The Chinese people have never looked back since the founding of the CPC in 1921 through 23 years of bloody Western and Japanese fomented civil war where 25 to 35 million military and civilian martyrs lost their lives for a great and noble cause. Mao Zedong's rallying cry, serve the people. After launching the Chinese dream, President Xi continues in the present to repeatedly inspire his citizens. There are hundreds of examples ongoing. On 18 October 2017, in a widely circulated report delivered at the 19th National Congress of the Communist Party of China, Xi stated, and I quote, "Comrades, our mission calls for responsibility, and the mission guides the future. We must live up to the great trust the people have placed in us and live up to our historical choice. In the great practice of socialism with Chinese characteristics in the new, and in brackets, Xi, end of brackets, era, We must use the strong leadership and tenacious struggle of the party to inspire all the sons and daughters of the Chinese nation to forge ahead and unite as a mighty force to building the Chinese dream. The dream of the Chinese people is closely connected with the dreams of peoples in other countries, and the Chinese dream cannot be realized without a peaceful international environment and a stable international order. We must strive for two overall goals, domestic and international. Firstly, unswervingly pursue the road of peaceful development and pursue a win-win strategy of opening up and adhering to a correct combination, and in brackets I pointed out, of communist, socialist, and market pathways in the economy, end of brackets. Continuing. Secondly, setting up a new global security concept of common integration, cooperation, sustainability, being open to innovation, tolerance, and mutually beneficial developmental prospects, promote different civilizations, eclectic exchanges, building an ecological system of respecting Mother Nature and green development, always being the builders of world peace, contributors to global development, and maintainers of the international order. When youth prospers, the nation prospers. A country is strong when its youth is strong. If the younger generation has ideals, competence, and responsibility, then the country has a future and the nation has a hope. The Chinese dream is historical, again in brackets going back to 1839, end of brackets, realistic and future-oriented. It belongs to our generation, but more importantly to the younger generation. The Chinese dream of the great rejuvenation of the Chinese nation will eventually come true, and in brackets further on year 2049, which I'll talk about, end of brackets, through the efforts of generations of young people. The whole party should care for young people and set up a stage for them to make their lives brilliant, period. Young people should have firm ideas and beliefs, in brackets. Yes, ideology and politics do matter, end of brackets. Aim high, keep their feet on the ground, ride the waves of the times, fly their dreams in the vivid practice of realizing the Chinese dream, and write a glorious chapter in their lives toward the unremitting struggle for the interests of the people. Continuing on, we should pursue a just cause for common good. We are standing on more than 9,600,000 square kilometers of this vast land, breathing in more than 5,000 years of long struggle for Chinese national civilization, accumulating spiritual sustenance for more than 1,300,000,000 people. We are an aggregation of force. We walk the road of socialism with Chinese characteristics, which has a very broad stage, has a very profound historical background, and a very powerful visionary focus. The party, the Chinese people of all ethnic groups will closely unite around the CPC Central Committee, holding the great banner of socialism with Chinese characteristics, forge ahead, work hard, promoting the construction of modernization in order to realize the complete reunification of the motherland, in brackets meaning Taiwan, Hong Kong, and Macau, end of brackets, safeguard world peace, and promote common development of three major historical tasks. And in brackets here I begin paraphrasing to update and detail this list of measurable goals, end of brackets. Historical task number 1, eliminate extreme poverty across the entire country by the end of 2020. Number 2, by 2021, the centennial celebration of the founding of the Communist Party of China, we will achieve the Confucian Taoist aspiration of Xiaokang, meaning middle-class prosperity for all. Historical task number 3, realizing the Made in China year 2025 plan, when at least 70% of all the people's high-tech needs will be nationally sourced and manufactured. Historical task number 4, work diligently for the China Standards Year 2035 plan, which will place technological norms in the hands of all countries of the world and not just those exclusively dictated and controlled by your Anglo-land. And finally, historical task number 5, in 2049, the centennial celebration of the founding of the People's Republic of China, the Chinese nation will be ready to realize the ancient and noble goal of Datong, meaning a pure communist society. In order to do so, China and all its people will be wealthy, highly educated, technologically and economically advanced, and militarily impregnable. End of Xi Jinping's speech that he gave in 2017. On with the article. Wow! Talk about coming full circle. The Chinese people are using 5,000-year-old communist ideals to plan for a harmonious shared future for all of humankind, while mapping out inspiring benchmark plans for 2049 and beyond. This while your Anglo-landers have been brainwashed that ideology is irrelevant, history ended with the fall of the USSR in 1990, citizens can't think past the 24-hour propaganda cycle, and businesses and their executives can only myopically see as far as their next quarterly stock reports and bonuses, respectfully. No wonder the greedy, rapacious, capitalist West can't compete fair and square with visionary, united, holistic, communist socialist China. This is why your Anglo-land can only resort to plain down and dirty gangsterism with attempted color revolutions, sanctions, blockades, extortion, false flags, sabotage, military encirclement, and territorial harassment like in the South China Sea. China has absorbed these non-stop attacks since 1949. Yet the West, headed by the United States, is ever so desperately failing to stop, much less slow down, the Chinese people's relentless march into the 22nd century. Yes, Baba Beijing is planning that far into the future. Therefore, more recently, the USA has resorted to almost daily casus belli, meaning reasons for war, in hopes of getting the Chinese to fire the first shot. What Trump and company have foisted on China since he was appointed to occupy the White House in 2017 is several magnitudes more than what Uncle Sam did to goad Japan into declaring war in 1941. It will not work. The West's utter ignorance of Chinese history, philosophy, and their central role in how 1/5 of the human race conducts itself knows no bounds. Sun Tzu, who wrote The Art of War, going back 2,500 years, was very clear about 2 points. 1, avoid direct confrontation at all costs, and 2, when in doubt, retreat. China's national leaders are well versed with this work, as well as all the other key historical texts involving governance and geopolitics. Still, accidents and misunderstandings do happen, especially when militaries are involved. To this end, the USA is just begging for something to transpire, so it keeps upping the ante. With its continually absurd and ineffectual, quote, freedom of navigation, end of quote. What a joke. marine and air sorties in the South China Sea. On 25 August 2020, a U.S. spy plane flew into Chinese airspace while the People's Liberation, the PLA, was conducting drills. In 1963 and 1965, China shot U-2 spy planes down while capturing and imprisoning the pilots. This time, with the international stakes much higher, Baba Beijing did not take the bait. This is surely much to the chagrin of Wehrmacht-crazed NATO, not to mention the loss of a U.S. presidential election propaganda bonanza for Trump. The long and the short of it is this. Western oligarchic capitalism held the USSR at bay for 2 generations. The latter did not adapt to the changing times and died. Since 1949, China has been on a path of geometric growth, progress, and development while applying Marxist dialectics to continually adapt and adjust every step of the way. Vis-a-vis Eurangloland's hapless anti-Sino-gangsterism, the Chinese nation's motto might as well be that of another fierce anti-imperial hero, Muhammad Ali, who said, and I quote, "Float like a butterfly and sting like a bee." Hey, come to think of it, didn't I read that passage in Sun Tzu's Art of War? Thank you. This is Jeff J. Brown signing out.